Japan on Friday matched the move by rival China and permitted its Coast Guard to fire on foreign vessels attempting to land on the Senkakus, 2 square miles of uninhabited islands in the East China Sea. The two countries' coast guards regularly face off around the chain as Chinese vessels anchor in shadow or rattle Japanese fishing vessels, and Japan's Coast Guard arrives to drive them away. Japan controls the islands, but Taiwan and China, which call them Diaoyu Dao, the Chinese name for the Senkaku Islands, also make claims. There have been cases of Chinese Coast Guard ships intruding into Japanese territorial waters and chasing after Japanese fishing ships. In February 2021, China's new maritime security law came into effect, authorizing Chinese Coast Guard's vessels to use weapons against supposed intruders in territories unilaterally claimed by China. The Japan Constitution generally forbids offensive military action. Article 9 of Japan's constitution bans offensive attacks, but defensive force is allowed. Yet, the Police Official Duties Execution Act, which applies to the nation's Coast Guard, may permit ships to fire on foreign vessels to prevent a heinous crime, including an attempt to land at the Senkakus, Chief Cabinet Secretary Katsunobu Kato said at a press conference Friday. A heinous crime is an offense that carries a penalty of death of more than 3 years in prison. This is the first time the Japanese government has clearly stated that its Coast Guard may fire on vessels attempting to land on Japanese soil. This is the consequence of recent incidents happening around the coastal areas of Senkakus. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Wang Wenbin in a February 8th press conference said Beijing is within its rights to stream through the waters, naming the islands inherent Chinese territory. The patrol and law enforcement activities by China Coast Guard in these waters are legitimate and lawful measures to safeguard sovereignty, he said according to a summarized transcript. Wrestling between China and Japan over the Diaoyu Senkaku Islands continues. Recent rounds of tensions have not only catalyzed Sino-Japanese relations, but also set the East Asia region in a conundrum. Witnessing re-emerging debates along with strong sentiments and issues like historical hatred and war memories, Taiwan and the Okinawa issue. To a certain degree, these issues are revisited at this sensitive timing and are thus brought back to the front burner. The focus will be on China's historical arguments in ancient and near history after World War II and its deployment of actions implying its effective administration upon the Diaoyu Senkaku Islands recently. China's challenges are multidimensional. How to refine their evidentiary effect of its historical evidence and arguments. How should the Taiwan issue that's deeply entangled with the Diaoyu Senkaku Islands issue help reify China's claim? How does China justify its interpretation of post-World War II legal and political regional arrangements paved by a series of international documents? How does China deploy effective administrative measures while avoiding regional stakeholder countries being greatly pitted against therewith? The Senkaku Islands, including the islands Otsurijima, Kubashima, and Taishujima, are a group of 5 islands and 3 reefs north of the Yaeyama Islands in Okinawa Prefecture. Based in both history and international law, the Senkaku Islands are part of the territory of Japan. In fact, Japan has effective control over them. Following the United Nations Economic Commission for Asia and the Far East or ECAFE survey report on coastal mineral resources in the fall of 1968, which indicated massive petroleum and gas resources in the seabed areas around the islands. After that, China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued their statement concerning the issue of China's sovereignty over the Diaoyu Islands on December 30, 1971, marking the beginning of the Chinese government's formal claims of authority over the islands. In the last few years, China Coast Guard or CCG vessels have made repeated invasions into territorial waters surrounding the Senkaku Islands and navigated in the contiguous zone. CCG vessels operated inside the territorial sea surrounding the Senkaku Islands for 111 days from April 14 to August 2, 2020. On several occasions, the vessels approached Japanese fishing boats operating in the sea surrounding the Senkaku Islands. Moreover, by November 2nd, the CCG vessels had entered and operated in the contiguous zone for a total of 283 days, setting a new record. The Chinese Coast Guard's rigorous approaches show that they're pressing on with intrusion into Japanese territory, despite the fact that it's essentially peacetime. The Japanese government says repeatedly that it firmly defends the Senkaku Islands, but it must take firmer action against the worsening movements of the Chinese Coast Guard. If things continue on its course, China could suddenly try to steal the Senkaku Islands and their surrounding waters. It could also try to occupy the islands and use them as a strategic military point. CCG vessels claim that they are exercising law enforcement activities in waters under the jurisdiction of China following Chinese laws. In a press briefing following talks between the foreign ministers of Japan and China on November 24, 2020, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi made comments to the effect that some Japanese fishing boats have repeatedly entered the waters surrounding the Senkaku Islands and China had to respond. However, these law enforcement activities by CCG vessels have not yet taken the functional form of inspecting Japanese fishing boats following Chinese domestic laws and regulations. The CCG vessels do not have the right to enforce Chinese laws and regulations in the territorial waters of Japan. Under the Japanese government's no-escalation policy, Japan is dealing with the activities of the CCG vessels through the law enforcement activities of the Japan Coast Guard or JCG in the sea areas under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea and the Laws of Japan. In particular, the JCG restricts the courses of the CCG vessels as they trespass into the territorial waters of Japan and requests that vessels that have intruded exit Japan's territorial waters. However, the number of CCG vessels operating in the waters surrounding the Senkaku Islands, the length of their constant presence in the area, and the number of incidents in which the vessels came into close contact with Japanese fishing boats have all increased in 2020. The activities of the Chinese government are escalating the situation. This situation was also acknowledged in the Annual Defense of Japan White Paper for 2020, approved at the cabinet meeting in July 2020. It stated, quote, "China has thus relentlessly continued attempts to unilaterally change the status quo by oppression in the sea area around the Senkaku Islands, leading to a grave matter of concern. Japan cannot accept China's actions to escalate the situation." Moreover, in the Japan-Australia Leaders Meeting Joint Statement dated November 17, 2020, the leaders expressed strong opposition to any coercive unilateral actions that seek to alter the status quo and increase tensions in the East China Sea. How should Japan respond? Japan needs to start by identifying, investigating, and evaluating the situation surrounding the Senkaku Islands, strictly assess any change in the situation, and use that assessment in its on-site responses. Whatever may happen in the Senkaku Islands and the waters surrounding the islands in 2021, Japan's policy and response should be beyond reproach, both domestically and internationally. Accordingly, starting now, Japan needs to bolster its message. Japan needs to use both diplomacy and defensive measures to drive out the Chinese Coast Guard and prevent an invasion of the Senkaku Islands. The hypothesis for doing so is that the country must beef up the Japan Self-Defense Forces, or JSDF, and the Japan Coast Guard. According to the experts, they should also speed up reinforcement in other areas by bolstering budgets, personal ships, and aircraft. Of course, it'll be important to again confirm with the government of the United States that it interprets the US commitment to protect Japan as encompassing the Senkaku Islands, as is stipulated in Article 5 of the Japan-US. Before that, though, Japan must make its preparations.